Nothing bad can happen. It can only good happen. But with Tylenol, don't take it. Don't take it. And if you can't live, if your fever is so bad, you have to take one because there's no alternative to that.
Autism, how about that? Autism tomorrow. Autism, how about that? Autism tomorrow.
Sadly, first question, what can you take instead? It's actually, there's not an alternative to that. And as you know, other of the medicines are absolutely proven bad. I mean, they've been proven bad. Virtually no autism. Virtually no autism.
Autism, how about that? Autism tomorrow.
Tylenol, Tylenol, Tylenol. Because there are a lot of stupid people in this country running things.
Autism. What is it? And what does it want? If you listened to the most powerful person on the planet, you might believe that it's on the rise, and that the only people who know how to stop it all just happen to be on the Epstein list. But is he right? What did this collection of Jeffrey Epstein associates, turned suddenly experts in childhood development, learn on the Lolita Express? Is autism a strange apparition that haunts pregnant people specifically, creating trans people YouTubers and high-speed rail? If so, how can we make more of it to fix our crumbling infrastructure? Where does it come from? Does it explain why the children of MAGA parents don't speak to them anymore? And will a miracle cure from someone who just happens to be one of Donald Trump's closest allies make it go away?
The FDA, based on NIH research, is approving prescription leucovorin for treatment of autistic children.
Well, you bet your ass it will, at least according to the most healthy men on the planet. Donald Trump, a man whose hand is literally rotting and who can no longer string a sentence together.
Well, I got a lot of friends, they're fat. They said, yeah, I lost some weight. I said, you don't look it to me.
And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a man who had half his brain eaten by a worm because he refused to stop eating raw meat. Very cool, very normal, very healthy.
I was on Jeffrey Epstein's jet 2 times.
These are exactly the type of people who we all need to explain to us what causes autism. Even though none of the stuff they say is true, they have no qualifications, there is bugger all science that agrees with them, that their allies benefit from their lives financially, and that we don't need a cure for autism in the first place.
Autism, how about that?
Okay, let's table that for now, and get back to the point. Donald Trump and RFK Jr. want you to know that they figured out what causes autism and how to prevent it, despite there being no need to prevent it because it's not a problem, and despite them having all the scientific bona fides of literal wizardry, or worse, homeopathy. So, in their infinite wisdom, the Watson and Crick of our time made a huge deal about making an autism announcement, and then gave an hour-long press conference insisting that autism was caused by the least effective and least dangerous painkiller you can get. Tylenol, or if you're not American and are therefore normal, paracetamol. As Trump put it afterwards on Truth Social in this incredibly normal post. Pregnant women, don't use Tylenol unless absolutely necessary. Don't give Tylenol to your young child for virtually any reason. Break up the MMR shot into 3 totally separate shots, not mixed. Take chicken peas shots separately. Take hepatitis B shot at 12 years old and older. And importantly, take vaccine in 5 separate medical visits. Love from a great man called President Donald J. Trump. So yeah, aside from asking us to take a chicken pea shot, which I don't think I really want to do for any reason, Donald Trump mixed in a bunch of stuff about not giving too many vaccines at once, splitting the MMR vaccine into 3 parts, like a somehow even more evil Andrew Wakefield, and not getting a hepatitis B shot, and that babies are being filled with too much water?
It's too much liquid. Too many different things are going into that baby at too big a number. You have a little child, little fragile child, and you get a vat of 80 different vaccines, I guess, and they pump so much stuff into those beautiful little babies. They're pumping, it looks like they're pumping into a horse.
Honestly, trying to summarize an hour of Trump ramblings is hard, but the takeaway message in the end was less frequent vaccines, and especially, as Trump said multiple times throughout his speech, don't take Tylenol.
Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it. With Tylenol, don't take it. Don't take it. Don't use Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Fight like hell not to take it. I think you shouldn't take it. Don't take Tylenol. The baby gets a shot. They say, here, take a drop of Tylenol. I've heard that for years. Take Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Don't have your baby take Tylenol. Don't give Tylenol to the baby. Don't give Tylenol to the baby. Don't give your baby Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it. Don't take it. So that's it. There's nothing much to say. Don't take Tylenol. Just don't take it. And I just say it again. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it.
Was he right? No! Let me explain how wrong this was. How this will cause huge amounts of harm to the USA and the international community that insists on hanging on to Trump's every word, and how Dr. Mehmet Oz is going to financially benefit from all of this, making bank on the suffering of the citizenry. Good evening. Or as Donald Trump would say, autism, how about that? Autism tomorrow. I'm your host, science and culture correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, Brigitte Empire, here with a special announcement. That announcement being that acetaminophen, also known as Tylenol or paracetamol, does not cause autism, before my editors can stop me from getting out the truth. You see, now that the United States government is full of conspiracy theorists, I can tell the truth about what the science shows about topics like autism and vaccines, and I can sound just as edgy and counterculture as idiots like RFK Jr. always tried to be. Did you know the government doesn't want you to know that vaccines are effective and good actually? Can Tylenol help you relieve pain when you're pregnant? Yes, the people at the top are lying to you. The government, the deep state, don't want you to know that the majority of extremism actually comes from the far right. And I can keep going, but I won't, because I'm here on a mission, damn it. A mission that I inherited when I got my PhD in paleontology and realised that there are no jobs working on dinosaurs and that I needed to get a new job. And that meant obviously becoming science's most transsexual defender. And so we're going to look at what the science actually says about acetaminophen and autism. And you can tell I'm actually a scientist because unlike Donald Trump, I can actually pronounce the name of the goddamn drug.
First, effective immediately, the FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen. Is that okay?
Also, because Donald Trump apparently needs educating on this, let's get a couple of things clear. Firstly, acetaminophen is recommended to pregnant people for pain because it's safer than alternatives. While opioids can be addictive, for example, and NSAIDs, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as ibuprofen, can cause gastrointestinal issues, acetaminophen, or as Trump is calling it, presumably for the sake of getting sued for more money than the human mind can comprehend for using a brand name, Tylenol, has relatively few adverse effects. Acetaminophen only affects the central nervous system, whereas, for example, ibuprofen reduces inflammation as well as relieving pain and has effects throughout the body. According to the Yale School for Public Health, for decades, acetaminophen has been the most commonly recommended pain reliever for pregnant women. Published reports have previously raised concerns about a possible link between acetaminophen use during pregnancy and an increased risk of developmental conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, but there are no studies that have established a causal link. There is no equivalent alternative for acetaminophen at the moment, as other over-the-counter pain medications such as ibuprofen are recommended to be avoided during pregnancy, especially after 20 weeks of gestation. Secondly, we don't need to cure autism. In fact, the fact that Trump keeps trying to do things that feel very Third Reich adjacent like this is just troubling. But even if we were to try and reduce actions and behaviours during childhood development that might make a kid more likely to be on the spectrum, the two things Trump is suggesting do that, acetaminophen, perhaps the most commonly taken painkiller and the one with the fewest side effects, as well as vaccines, would not be your go-to, because neither of them cause autism. We know that because we've done many studies on these things, and it turned out that these suggested links are non-existent. But what would you expect, I suppose, when you make a notorious anti-vaccine, anti-science meat mech puppeted by a parasitic worm the highest authority on public health in your country? Quite contrary to the claims of Muad Dweeb here, the rising cases of autism can be attributed largely to waning social stigma and the changes over time in how autism is diagnosed. Much like with, say, trans people, another group of people Trump has made it his mission to disappear en masse, the internet providing more education and resources, as well as the changing landscape of psychology and medicine, naturally led to more people getting diagnosed. Just as rates of left-handedness skyrocketed once being left-handed stopped being punished and the stigma began to fade away. People like RFK Jr. and Mehmet Oz, the primary financial beneficiary of this announcement in the administration, for reasons we'll get into a bit later, have been doing the media rounds insisting that when they were growing up, there weren't that many people with autism, and that there is no one their age with autism.
Part of the reason there has been increased diagnosis is because medical understanding of autism has increased, so there's more understanding and so more diagnosis.
Without question. But in addition, look at someone my age, our age, Bobby, Senator Secretary Kennedy's age. We don't have a lot of people in our lives our age who are on the autism spectrum.
Well, we maybe don't have many people who were diagnosed on the autism.
But think about it right now, if you look around at your friend group or people you grew up with, just think back in time. How many people who are, I'm 65 this year, I don't remember ever meeting a child when I was a kid who was on the spectrum.
But there just wasn't the same understanding of it.
I agreed, but even so, if you look around, you see children who have autism in many different settings with families. So I do think there's a real increase, not just a measured increase.
Despite them not having tested everyone they know or even themselves, and that they grew up in a much more socially conservative time when social stigma around being autistic meant people were much less likely to seek out a diagnosis, and the criteria for diagnosing someone as on the autism spectrum has changed since then. As Chan Boon et al. Put it in Frontiers in Psychiatry, autism as a phenomenon has been understood in a number of different ways since its first description in 1943, both by scholars, professionals, laypeople, and the individuals with autism themselves. 70 years separate Canada's first description of autism to our current designation of autism spectrum disorders, and in that time, rates of diagnoses have increased exponentially as better knowledge has improved detection. Since the 1940s, rates of diagnosis of autism have increased greatly. However, there is no reason to think that there has been any change in occurrence over the last 70 years, suggesting rather an increase in our knowledge and our awareness. Autism has been the subject of several misapprehensions and misrepresentations throughout history. This might be due to heterogeneity of the cases. In addition, the diagnosing of autism spectrum disorders is mainly based on observation and behavioural interpretation, and thus dependent on the subjective perception of the clinicians themselves. The thing is though, despite all of this, trying to argue with MAGA cultists and other far-right figures about this is sort of like arguing with a brick wall.
Drug company people I've talked to, they've been predicting for a while that Tylenol will basically be pulled off the market soon. It's very bad as well. Showing is in the studies is that women that take Tylenol during pregnancy weakens a whole bunch of systems in the fetuses. Then it contributes, once you get the pesticides that are in the food and things, once you get the shots, it just pushes you over the edge. And there's a name for that, binary weapon.
Their entire ideology is rooted in a nostalgia for an imagined perfect past where nothing bad could happen, and can only good happen. Where everything worked perfectly. The world they're desperate to get back to by doing unimaginable cruelty to people they don't picture in their funhouse mirror version of the past they daydream about. This has been core to fascism in almost all of its iterations. As such, the very idea that things are different to the way that they were when they were younger is seen as an aberration. A wrong to be put right. Heck, even their anti-vaccination sentiments are borderline rooted in nostalgia themselves, with Donald Trump insisting on taking the MMR, measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, as 3 separate vaccines, something with its precise origin in the original anti-vaccine scare in the late 1990s. As many of you will know, in 1998, disgraced former surgeon Andrew Wakefield had a patent for a single measles vaccine, which wouldn't be super successful if everyone was still taking the MMR vaccine and getting protection against 3 diseases at once. Much better value, much easier for parents and for the children. And so, he fabricated a study, manipulating evidence and getting real creative with the concept of medical ethics to manufacture a controversy about the MMR vaccine causing autism. The paper in The Lancet that he led was eventually retracted. His work was widely discredited, and he was struck off the UK medical register, basically exiled from being a doctor. But the scare he invented did not go away. It only got wider, and got absorbed into a number of conspiracy theories, expanding its influence, especially as the internet became much more of a part of everyday life. If you're interested in this topic, you can of course watch H. Bomber Guy's video on it, like I need to recommend you a video you've probably already seen, or you can watch Brian Deer's documentary, which is where we get a massive portion of our knowledge on what Wakefield was actually doing and how he pulled it off.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Brian Deer, Channel 4 Television. Could I talk to you about your research, sir, and your commercial ambitions? Excuse me.
Now, Donald Trump repeating this lie, almost 30 years later, as old as saying that makes me feel, just goes to show that the United States government is being run by people who do not care about the science, about facts, about harm reduction, or about genuinely promoting public health. It's governed by conspiracy theorists.
There are books that are written on how the election was rigged. There are numerous books that were written on how the election was rigged.
Just to be clear, were you listening to your lawyer's advice or were you listening to your own instincts?
I was listening to different people, and when I added it all up, the election was rigged.
People to whom the facts don't matter at all. Only the narrative matters. And I guess the bag matters too. Dr. Oz is certainly going to take the bag, and it's going to be full of dollars. You see, like Wakefield in the 90s, Dr. Oz, seen here in the press conference with Donald Trump promoting this, happens to have ties to a little company called iHerb, a company that produces leucovorin, or folinic acid, which just happens to be the miracle cure that Dr. Oz, along with Trump and RFK Jr., are pushing. In fact, here's Dr. Oz, in that press conference, doing his best impression of Andrew Wakefield presenting the single measles vaccine, declaring that the FDA is approving leucovorin for treatment of autistic children.
The FDA, based on NIH research, is approving prescription leucovorin for treatment of autistic children. Now, if you're following the script, there should be two questions that you have, two questions that should come to your mind. The first is, how will patients and parents get access to the treatment? I'll tell you how. Over half of American children are covered by Medicaid and CHIP, government health insurance, over half. And therefore, because they're covered in Medicaid and CHIP, upon this label change by Marty, state Medicaid programs in partnership with CMS will cover prescription leucovorin around the country. It's yours, but you have to go to a doctor to get a prescription because they know your child, they know you, and they know the medication. States will also have tools to monitor its use and ensure appropriate utilization. That's important for a bunch of reasons because we want the right kids getting the right prescription medications. We believe private insurance companies will rapidly follow our lead if they have not already done so. And again, to make sure that this is safe and effective treatment, you need a physician to prescribe the medication because it's on prescription.
Leucovorin will be made available on Medicaid as part of an aggressive campaign to treat autism. Oz, the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, said Trump was unwilling to wait for results. Mr. President, God bless you for being brave. So brave, so incredibly brave to line your pockets at the expense of the public health of an entire country. Brave is exactly the word I would use. Although, I guess if you want to start twisting the meaning of words, it is pretty brave to declare you're going to aggressively treat a condition that doesn't need to be treated and that we shouldn't be trying to cure. Because autistic people are people, using a medicine that's effectiveness at this inherently evil and fascist thing you're trying to do has yet to be scientifically proven at all. This is a really sick mixture of charlatanism and exterminationism, which is, I suppose, the unique cocktail that makes up the Trump regime's brand of fascism.
Hello, everyone. This is Donald Trump. Hopefully your favorite president of all time, better than Lincoln, better than Washington, with an important announcement to make. They're called Trump Digital Trading Cards. These cards feature some of the really incredible artwork pertaining to my life and my career. It's been very exciting.
Even besides the sheer horror of that, this is all just nakedly corrupt, not to mention dangerous. And that's without even getting to Trump imploring people to not give kids the hepatitis B vaccine because he thinks it's an STD that they don't need because they're not sexually active.
Hepatitis B is sexually transmitted. There's no reason to give a baby that's almost just born hepatitis B. So I would say wait till the baby is 12 years old and formed and take hepatitis B.
When in fact there's obvious reasons why kids get this vaccine, because you can get it through your mother, through the blood, as a baby. And if untreated, it can cause chronic liver disease. So, you know what? I think we should be listening to the experts for medical advice, and not a guy who puts on so much spray tan he looks like if jaundice was a person. So then, I guess I shouldn't be surprised about how the Trump administration is so willing to just lie about Tylenol causing autism. Forget about the fact that Tylenol use amongst pregnant women has gone down as autism rates have gone up over the past decade, despite that completely contradicting his argument. Apparently facts just don't matter at all. There are a bunch of reasons too why something as commonly taken as acetaminophen might end up being correlated with something you might not expect. Not because it actually causes it, but because it's ubiquitous. I take paracetamol when I have a headache. I have lots of headaches. You could, if you looked at my life, find a million different health indicators that changed when I took paracetamol, but it's not because paracetamol caused it, but because I took it when I felt pain. But if you were interested in that study that completely disproves Trump's argument, just listen to this piece about it on CNN and see how quickly these unscientific lies unravel once you get someone on who knows literally anything at all about the subject these dunces in the White House are lying about this week.
You know, it's interesting, Kate, there's something known as paradox of ubiquity. When you have something that is widely used, it can be correlated or linked to just about anything. And I think that's what we're dealing with Tylenol. It is important to point out that Tylenol use among pregnant women has actually gone down over the last 10 years. But despite the fact that it went down, autism rates have gone up. What happened as a result of all these studies over the last 20 years is that this huge study was done out of Sweden last year. 25 years, actually, they followed these kids. More than 2 million kids, about 10% of them had mothers who took Tylenol during pregnancy. They then compared to siblings. So they were trying to control for genetics. And what they found as a result of that study was that there was no correlation in terms of cause and effect between Tylenol and autism.
One of the difficult things with trying to link anything to a simple painkiller like Tylenol that's super readily available is that it is taken for a number of reasons, any of which could cause certain effects. It would not mean then that Tylenol is the cause. It is taken for pain. You could take anything that is associated with pain and try and link it to Tylenol if you're just assuming correlation is causation. If you ignore the fact that Tylenol is being taken because something else is going on. Nevertheless, there are ways to control for these things, and science has indeed been done on the potential links between acetaminophen and autism. And guess what? It looks like it has nothing to do with it. In fact, I have the giant study that CNN clip was referring to right in front of me. A 2024 study by Victor Alkvist et al. Titled Acetaminophen Used During Pregnancy and Children's Risk of Autism, ADHD and Intellectual Disability. And it's very simple in this study to find out how wrong Trump and co were about this association here, because it has a handy little conclusion summary right in the abstract, which Donald Trump or anyone could have read. It's right at the top, and it's 2 sentences long, so even Trump could probably read it. And in fact, you only really need the first sentence to settle this. Acetaminophen use during pregnancy was not associated with children's risk of autism, ADHD, or intellectual disability. And this study is pretty damn important for getting to the bottom of this due to just how extensive it was. According to Nature, as well as the paper itself, Alkvist et al. Harnessed data from nearly 2.5 million children born in Sweden between 1995 and 2019, and compared pairs of siblings where one was exposed and one was not, and found no association between acetaminophen and autism. And this year, a study out of Japan by Okubo et al., consisting of over 200,000 children, also with sibling comparisons, again, found no link between acetaminophen use during pregnancy and autism. Now, I've mentioned these sibling comparisons a couple of times. These are pretty important to get the information right, because even though there is basically naffle evidence of Tylenol during pregnancy causing autism in the general population, even the tiny chance there might be some sort of correlation that's hidden in the data, once you control for siblings who have the same upbringing and 50% the same DNA, so same environment and very close genetics, well, that incredibly slim chance of acetaminophen usage during pregnancy causing autism in kids drops way down to almost zero. Even that tiny little chance that people were latching onto before was found to be due to familial confounding. Confounding being the phenomenon in which factors outside those monitored for the study can lead to effects or outcomes that are observed in the study. The data presented in this study, then, is an effect without a cause, if there's an effect at all. As Dr. Eric Ding put it on his Substack, in all consumer data, sales of condoms were correlated with sales of household appliances. Did buying condoms make people buy microwaves? Of course not. The confounding variable was income. Families with more money were simply likely to buy both. Confounding is the juggernaut to overcome when drawing causal conclusions.
I'm the juggernaut, bitch! I'm gonna hit you with your own pimp!
Does Tylenol cause autism? Or is it the fever, the very reason people take Tylenol, that carries the risk? Is the fever a confounding variable? How much is the mother's health a factor? These studies cannot overcome these confounding problems because of the data they have access to. Here's the great news. A huge high-quality study solved this problem last year. A Swedish study of 2.5 million children published in JAMA in 2024 used sibling pair analysis, comparing families where the mother took Tylenol during one pregnancy but not another. Sibling pair analysis is the best way to remove the confounding variables. By looking at different pregnancies of the same mother, sibling pair analysis keeps constant her underlying susceptibility to fevers, which means differences in outcomes can't simply be explained by some mothers being more fever-prone than others. At the same time, it controls for family-to-family differences in genetics, environment, and health behaviours. This makes it the gold standard for ruling out confounding in large observational studies. The result was clear. The data showed no increased risk. It shows that Tylenol use during pregnancy is not linked to autism, ADHD, or intellectual disability. We finally have the answer because of the hard work of scientists. That is until RFK Jr. and Donald Trump decided to blow everything up.
So I just want to say acetaminophen is basically Tylenol, essentially.
Now Trump, during this press conference, tried to justify this completely unscientific notion of a link between Tylenol and autism by citing autism rates in Cuba, a subject he knows literally nothing about and just came up with on the fly as an excuse.
There are parts of the world that don't take Tylenol. I mean, there's a rumor, and I don't know if it's so or not, that Cuba, they don't have Tylenol because they don't have the money for Tylenol, and they have virtually no autism, okay? Tell me about that one. And there are other parts of the world where they don't have Tylenol, where they don't have autism. That tells you a lot.
According to the Sunday Times, which I'm very reluctantly citing here because it was concisely written and was taking a break from saying that all trans people belong in the camps. With Tylenol, don't take it. Don't take it, Trump warned repeatedly. He added, in Cuba, they don't have Tylenol because they don't have the money for Tylenol. They have no autism. Tell me about that one. Cuba had an autism rate of 83.3 per 10,000 children in 2023, according to data from the Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network. The US rate was 80.9, the same data shows. Cuba does have trouble getting a hold of some medicines because of the multi-decade-long embargo from the United States. Nevertheless, they do get by, and in fact are famously really good at medicine despite the best efforts of the United States, and do in fact have acetaminophen and also have autism. It's not true that, as Trump said, there is no autism in Cuba. Obviously, only someone whose brain has melted into a fine paste could possibly believe that. Thankfully, Trump seems to agree with me about this.
Because there are a lot of stupid people in this country running things. And how big is that? But to me, that's nothing compared to autism.
And it's not like people haven't been trying to stop the president from spreading medical misinformation, even at this late stage. At the press conference itself, reporters tried to ask a simple question about the opinion of medical professionals, only to get shut down for being fake news.
Here they have essentially no autism, so you'll have to check it out. Yeah, right.
Medical professionals have warned for decades.
No, not you. You're CNN. You're fake news. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to go back to the Amish community.
As I walk through the valley where I harvest my grain.
Now, I don't know if it was going to be a good question, but if any mention of actual professionals or discussions of the science that comes from someone other than Donald Trump's pet grifters like RFK and Oz immediately gets shut down, how do you think this guy is ever going to receive any information that isn't just an exercise in crooked sycophancy? Speaking of the person in the room with Trump most likely to be making a killing off all this stuff, wannabe Andrew Wakefield Dr. Oz may have pledged to divest his shares in IHEP so he isn't profiting off this very strange and out-of-the-blue distraction from the Epstein files, press conference. But even if he did get rid of all financial ties, as iHerb is now insisting, he was their guy. Then he got into office and made them all potentially incredibly rich. And when he leaves the administration, he'll be able to walk straight back into that company, take a cushy job for earning him a fortune, and profit off of all the corruption he did this week. And that's if we even believe him and this dodgy company that he's cut off ties. How many times have we heard stuff like this from this administration? Trump is involved in so many corruption scandals at this point that it's hard to keep count. And it's not even been a year yet. But just to be fair here, let's take a brief look at Luke Culverin, since we might as well have a peek at the miracle cure to something that doesn't need to be cured that Dr. Oz is about to make a killing from. So, according to NPR, at the behest of Trump, and with no formal review, the FDA is in the process of changing their product's label. the change will include language, indicating that leucovorin can improve certain symptoms in adults and pediatric patients with cerebral folate deficiency, according to an FDA document published in the Federal Register. Cerebral folate deficiency, CFD, is a rare condition in which a person's brain isn't getting enough vitamin B9. CFD typically appears before age 2, causing a range of symptoms, including intellectual disability, lack of muscle control, and seizures. Some of the symptoms overlap with those of autism spectrum disorder. One scientific review of a very limited range of studies found that 38% of people with autism had antibodies that can lead to CFD. The same review found that treatment with leucovorin significantly improved communication in some autistic individuals. Reviews like this one, which combine data from multiple studies, are prone to bias and are only as good as the underlying research they include. Also, the potential impact of leucovorin treatment will remain uncertain until scientists establish how many people in the spectrum have CFD and whether the condition actually causes autism. So, this drug is for treating what is essentially a vitamin B9 deficiency in the brain and causes symptoms which sometimes overlap with some of those associated with people on the autism spectrum. If an autistic person has CFD, this might well help them with certain issues, namely those caused by CFD. But there's a big leap from may help with some symptoms to cure for autism, a completely different thing. If that's even a thing we should be thinking about, which we shouldn't. Either way, the evidence we have right now just isn't sufficient at all to make the conclusions and recommendations that Dr. Oz and the rest of Trump's team have. And even though Dr. Oz said in that press conference that Medicaid would cover prescription leucovorin around the country, in truth, Medicaid will only cover the drug for autistic patients with CFD. You know, the thing it actually provably helps with. But now that a TV doctor and the literal president have said so, a little thing like having no evidence isn't going to stop people from trying to get their hands on it, potentially reducing stock needed for people who actually have CFD and need this so-called miracle cure, and giving it to their children when they don't need it at all, and risking potential side effects. And for what? Because to them, the idea of having an autistic child is terrifying? Why? Autistic people are great. They're kind, they're funny, they're inventive, they're smart, they're people. Just like everyone else. But this is the sort of mindset that spreads like a virus when people like RFK spread lies about autism like...
Autism destroys families. More importantly, it destroys our greatest resource, which are our children. These are children who should not be suffering like this. These are kids who, many of them were fully functional and regressed because of some environmental exposure into autism when they're 2 years old. And these are kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize we are doing this to our children, and we need to put an end to it.
All of which are just patently false. RFK Jr. doesn't know what the fuck autism is, or what it means for someone to live with autism. And yet here he is, painting it like it's some sort of debilitating curse that must be lifted with some semi-religious miracle cure, and that a life without autism isn't worth living. And it is. Autistic people are people with full lives, like everyone else without autism. They don't need to be cured, and they certainly aren't living the kind of half-life that RFK Jr., a man who was literally missing a chunk of his brain, imagines. This rhetoric is dangerous, and now it's coming from the office of the most powerful person on the planet. This hate, these lies, this exterminationist language is a virus. And we need to counter that virus before it spreads. We need a vaccine.
Not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good.
The only thing that shocks me about Dr. Oz grifting off the public health of an entire nation is that he still thinks he needs to keep the corruption on the down low. Like, we all know evidence doesn't matter to these people. Yes, there's little to no evidence that Dr. Oz's cure will do anything, and yes, there's no evidence that autism is caused by the things they're insisting now it's caused by. And no, autistic people don't need curing, they're just people. And this talk of eradicating them as if it's making the world a healthier place is sick, disgusting, and frankly so openly fascist that it's bananas that no one is talking about that aspect of it. But I suppose at this point, no one is surprised about how cruel this regime is anymore. People are being kidnapped on the street and shoved into camps, never to be heard from again, deported to random countries. At this point, people expect the most flagrant violations of every principle at any time. I just wish we didn't. I wish people could stop for a moment and take a look at what is happening long enough to see that this is setting the stage for doing to autistic people some very dangerous things. Like, for example, what the Third Reich did to them.
Asperger's signature condemned at least a couple of children to death, and also there's evidence that he sat on a committee that decided whether children would live or die.
The Nazis famously sent a lot of disabled people to camps and considered them degenerate, bad for society. In fact, the term Asperger's actually has its origins in the Third Reich and was coined by a Nazi who explicitly wanted a way to protect the children on the spectrum he deemed intelligent and socially useful, while still actively sending the rest to their deaths. This man, Hans Asperger, was responsible for the systematic murder of children with disabilities in Vienna under the Nazis, and actively sent many children to their deaths for the crime of not being the right type of autistic for said Nazis. The disabled are usually one of the first groups that fascists go after. And speaking of curing a group of people because they don't fit the kind of society you want, they don't have a place in your 1950s fantasy of America, well, that's fascist shit. Disabled people, trans people, immigrants, none of us have a place in the type of America that they want to build. A vision of America they've dreamed up as an imagined past where there were no problems, and coincidentally, every group they irrationally hate and want disappeared just happens to not be there. If you bought into this administration, frankly, corruption is kind of small potatoes. You've done much worse than make dirty money, Dr. Oz. You've signed up for a 21st century Mussolini tribute act. And if they're right about the theology they keep trying to push on the rest of us, well, you're also, on top of that, going to hell. And this does, in fact, somehow get even worse. According to the Times, the scientists behind the claims cited by the Trump administration to push their unscientific link between acetaminophen and Tylenol was paid $150,000 to give unreliable testimony and false evidence. President Trump's claim that pregnant women can give babies autism by using Tylenol is partly based on the study by a scientist who was previously paid $150,000 to give expert evidence in a claim against the drug's manufacturers. During a press conference on Monday, Dr. Marty Makary, Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, cited Bacciarelli's study, along with two others, as justification for officially advising pregnant women against taking Tylenol. Makary said Bacciarelli's review found the overwhelming body of evidence points to an association, and quoted the Harvard academic directly as saying, "We cannot wait any longer." But in the summer of 2023, Bacciarelli served as an expert witness during a class action lawsuit against Kenvue, the maker of Tylenol. A group of parents filed the suit in 2022 with a New York federal court, alleging their children's autism and ADHD was a result of prenatal use of acetaminophen, which is called paracetamol outside of North America. According to a court deposition in August 2023, Bacciarelli said he had made about $150,000 as an expert witness in the case. Very cool, and not at all corrupt. These are now the standards the Trump administration are using to push their exterminationist rhetoric. Bad science and just outright twisting of the very concept of truth. Not to mention making boatloads of cash from seedy means. From RFK Jr. to Dr. Oz to Bacciarelli to Trump himself, the corruption, the lies, the desperation for dirty money is everywhere in this White House. You can say a lot about the second Trump term. It's outright fascist, it's authoritarian, it's so flagrantly violating the established rules of law in the USA that the country may well never recover. All of these things are absolutely true, but more than anything else, this is ruled by scam artists, the most powerful nation on the planet, commanded by a cabal of confidence men. No matter how dark things get under this administration, it's kind of fascinating to think that despite the masters of the universe these 1930s LARPers might think they are, that this whole operation is one massive con job. It's grifters all the way down. This is the Trump administration. You can be as corrupt and evil as you want and no one will even bat an eye. Look around you, Oz. Everyone else is just swimming in filth and shouting to the rooftops about it. No need to hide, you might as well embrace it. Besides, even when Dr. Oz said that he would divest his iHerb holdings back in February, he said in a separate disclosure that he might keep some of the stock, and we don't actually know how many shares the bad doctor still has. Weirdly, this wouldn't be the most unethical thing to even come out of this press conference. The anti-vaccine messaging was. That'll genuinely leave a trail of bodies in its wake, especially coming from the mouths of the most powerful person on the planet and members of his administration. At this point, corruption is just, well, it's just another day, as tragic as that is. It shows how cynical everyone involved here is. But it is the actual danger that corruption is creating that I'm still worried about. As much blood as the Trump administration has in its hands, it doesn't seem to ever hesitate in creating more. And so, since American public health bodies are increasingly put under pressure to comply with this cabal of science-denying monsters, the duty falls onto us to educate those around us. If you have family or friends espousing anti-vaccine propaganda, railing against Tylenol, and especially if they're talking about autism as if they're a Nazi physician in Austria, push back. Try to set the record straight. We need to look out for each other and our communities. Be a human vaccine. When dangerous misinformation comes from this horrific regime, make sure you have herd immunity from their bullshit. Keep people informed. So even if 1 or 2 people believe it hook, line, and sinker, it doesn't spread and doesn't put more people in danger. Keep your community safe and look out for each other. Make sure that if this shower of bastards comes for you, that you're prepared and that you have each other's backs. If for nothing else, then so you don't get disappeared by Bitcoin salesmen and the guy that bankrupted multiple casinos. Don't let this unholy alliance between grifters and black shirts win. The people united will never be defeated, as the saying goes. Or as Trump would say it, nothing bad can happen, it can only good happen. Thanks for watching.
Nothing bad can happen, it can only good happen. But with Tylenol, don't take it.
Nothing bad can happen, it can only good happen, but with Tylenol, don't take it. And if you can't live, if your fever is so bad, you have to take one because there's no alternative. Sadly, first question, what can I take instead? It's actually, there's not an alternative to that. I mean, they've been proven bad. So bad, nothing that can happen, it can only good happen, but with Tylenol, don't take it. And if you can't live, if your fever is so bad, you have to take one because there's no alternative. Don't take it. Hey, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you liked it, give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe, share it with all your friends, and tell everyone about it. Help me out if you can. It's coming up to autumn where my birthday is. It's in October, so I'm pushing to get my Brigitte Empire out of her overdraft before her birthday initiative. That didn't make grammatical sense, but you get it, which will inevitably probably extend to the Get Brigitte Empire out of her overdraft before Christmas initiative. So if you want to help with this and get me debt-free before 34, you can give me one-time donations on Coffee or PayPal, links below. You can go to my Fourth Wall page, which has some shirts on it now, if you like a shirt. It's got a Daily Telegraph on it. I'll put some on screen now. And if I didn't, it means that I forgot to do that. So hopefully I didn't forget to do that. Also, help me out if you can. 'Tis the season, and by season I mean my birthday. And also I'm going through some pretty bad personal stuff, which is making me very sad and means I might need a big lump of money in the future. So if you can help me gather that lump of money, I'd really help, as well as the get out of the overdraft thing. So just in general, things might be looking pretty dire for a little bit, but yeah, if you can't help, don't feel bad about that. But if you can, do. Or the best way to do that is to sign up to my Patreon or YouTube memberships, where you can do the best thing that you want me to do. You can be my best friend, and by best friend I mean my patron. You can get early videos, access to the members only Discord, my Nintendo Switch friend code, and exclusive content that's just long form interviews. And also, you get your name read out at the end of each video, just like these lovely people. Buried Elk, Ewan Bennett, Bags, Malcolm, Gina Service, You Are Made of Stupid, Tomo, Melissa Jackson, Ren Approves Your Stuff, Minstrel of course, Emma Not Emma, Jeffreyon, Tom the Not Quite So Brave as Sir, Lancelot, LFR, Tricoi, Proquar, Ariella, Robin Thomas, Kathy 1410 Itchy, Justice for My Boy Gandalf, Gull Escape, Kira B, No Sparkling Heart, Corey, Gianna J, Mighty than the Sword, Carolyn, Imogen Q, Luciana Frias Andrade, Adam, Harry, Endog191, Cav, Quesadilla de Tortilla, Zul, Leron, Adam Lees, Daniel Nevels, No Not That Paul, MB, Wandering Wonder, Lex Phoenix, Enter Kurzitz, Mira D, J Senior, Boa Ear, James W, Marvin Dorr, Foreign Guild, Deborah Laboon, Zilla's Athenaeum, Vince Whitaker, Amelia Lassette, Jason Haig, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena Real, Sierra Whiskey, Ali Catgill, John N, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Dade, and Robin Podolsky, Nightlife, Plushy Jesus, Casual Observer, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Phil Peterbrogger, Soa Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Dan McMillan, Karen Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, PJ Lisbroll, Howard Lott, Neronius Guardian, and Jade Luciferian, Ataraxis Builds Things, and Sarah Francesca Smith. Thank you all so much. Have a great day and a great life, and yeah. Check in on your people, because sometimes things are hard and they need a hug. I need a hug.
Autism, how about that? Autism tomorrow.